Okay.
It's your item.
Donna Labby is going to come up and share with us the early childhood grant.
I think they have this.
Good
Is there a
evening.
handout?
It's in the packet.
Oh,
No,
okay.
it's
It's a
on-
separate piece
Oh, yeah,
that I
okay.
put on.
Yeah, pretty,
It's on the table.
good
It's on the
evening.
green
Hold on.
paper.
Is everyone on?
It says what, who, where, when, and why. It wasn't in the packet, John, it was left out for some. Yeah, okay, that's just, okay. Jess, you need one?
Yeah.
Jeremy, is there one for the hand?
So I got plenty here.
Oh, all right, then. Mike.
Yeah.
Mike. Mike. I'm all set. Go ahead.
You have one more?
Yes. Who doesn't have them?
Here. All set, Mike. All set?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Good evening, board members. Thank you for having me here for a couple minutes to share with you some wonderful news for Torrington. We were the recipients of a $1.3 million grant, one out of only 14 communities in the state of Connecticut. And I want to just thank the leadership here for seeing how having the vision that, you know, investing early in early childhood can make wonderful, wonderful gains in the long run. We wouldn't have been noted for this grant or cited for this grant if it wasn't for Superintendent Clacko's leadership, the board's support, and Mayor Carbone's support as well. So I just want to really thank everybody. And at the last board meeting, there were some questions that came up about this grant, because it is a sizable grant, and I can understand there's a lot of confusion around it, and right now, a lot of the details are being kind of laid in front of us. It's kind of like building the plane as we're flying it, but we are just so happy to be a part of this statewide initiative with the Office of Early Childhood. So in front of you, what I put together was a little kind of cheat sheet to give you the nuts and bolts of what exactly this is. And basically, in a nutshell, 80 families will benefit from this in Torrington that are 200% below the poverty level, which would mean about $47,000 for a family of 4. The sites that were chosen were specific to school readiness sites because they were designated as high-quality centers. And we were able to put in, like I said, 80 slots, 42 expansion slots, so 42 new families, and then 38 improved slots, which would take half-day preschool to full day. Currently, the Torrington Board of Ed is the fiscal agent for the school readiness grants, so these funds needed to follow the same path. I have 3 sites that were on here: Torrington Child Care Center, Hilltop Christian Early Learning Center, and Head Start. They were the chosen sites, and they will pretty much run the same way they've been running with the school readiness slots already, except they'll just have additional funds and additional capacity to serve families. It's a year-round for the 42, and it's wraparound services. So it's coordinated services. It's not just their academic criteria, but their medical as well, and mental health. It's really soup to nuts. It's the Cadillac of preschools. So we're really happy to be able to offer this to the families in Torrington. And so with that, if anybody has any questions, yes?
How were these sites chosen? Was there a bid process?
The Office of Early Childhood contacted the School Readiness Council, and what they asked for the improved slots, they had to be at the existing school readiness centers, so it was pretty much just designated. The other criteria was for the expansion slots that it had to be school readiness, they have to be able to meet the school readiness requirements, which is pretty hefty. They are monitored 3 times a year. The teachers have to have a certain amount of credentials. They have to be NIAC accredited or Head Start accredited, which is the national kind of gauge of how the preschool is being conducted. So,
They also have to follow Connecticut state standards for early childhood.
So is that for the 42? The
Correct.
42 new
Yep.
is the only one that was
Yes.
discretionary? How much, and I know we keep going back and forth on their nonprofits, but how much will Torrington Child Care Center receive for these 42 slots?
it's probably, the student rate is about 18,000 per student, which is phenomenal, but that's to run a 10-hour full-day program so that parents can work. So their amount would be based on that, so you just have to do the math out from there.
I mean, my concern, and I'm gonna be honest, is because of the amount of money that's transferring, the fact that this wasn't put out to bid concerns me, with other centers that have.
Well, I have something that might help you. We have a letter from the state, Office of Early Childhood, that notes in this letter that those 3 sites had to be in the grant that was submitted to the feds. So we do have that paper trail there that
But
no
that's
other.
for the improved slots, right?
No,
The improved slots, however, the line in here that says that all locations must meet the requirements for school readiness and state-funded childcare centers.
Right, but we do have other facilities that meet that requirement, is my concern.
They don't, though. We have NIAC accredited centers, but they don't follow the same regulations as the school readiness sites do. There's three times a year they have to be monitored. There's many, many hoops that they have to jump through in order to be a school readiness site.
Is that something that someone could do? How hard would it be for someone to
We-
go from NIAC accredited to school readiness certified?
That's a good question. Last year, we had an expansion. The governor, had 1,000 new slots in Connecticut. So we put out a local RFP to all the providers in the community and gave them an opportunity to come on board to be a school readiness site. And Hilltop Christian Early Learning Center did do an RFP, and they were vetted as a school readiness site. So they've been going through all those hoops and have become school readiness. So there is a capability for them to become school readiness if we get more expansion slots.
The other thing too is Torrington Child Care Center is the city of Torrington's early childhood education center.
Right, but, I mean, we have to look at what our process is for awarding contracts, and
Oh, we didn't have to.
I mean, even if you put it out and no one else is qualified, at least we followed our procedure for putting it out there for.
And I could understand that rationale. These 3 centers were put in as sub-grantees in the federal grant, so only these 3 centers. We wouldn't have had the ability to put it out to bid. And we have the grant application that has these centers designated in it.
But we designated.
We did, based on the criteria that the state
Right,
said.
we could have bid it before we designated.
We didn't have the money in hand, so we couldn't really put out a request for a proposal if we didn't have the money in
You
hand.
could have done an RFI, it's a request for interest, which is the same as an RFP, it's just before you have the funding, where you pre-qualify people to participate in a project. And if those that pre-qualified, you get the money, then they could be in it, but they would have been, if they were qualified or met the qualifications, could have been listed in the grant as well. And to follow up on Fiona's question, how did Torrington Child Care get designated for the new slots and the other 2 didn't get any new slots?
They didn't want any.
Okay.
The other 2. But to kind of go back to that point, for putting it out to bid, so the call comes in September, they had to get the grant in October to, the federal government. They made the requirements very strict, and only these 3 centers met the requirements on paper. So there really was no opportunity to go out and vet other centers.
There's no time limit on an RFI. It can be a day, it can be a week, it can be an hour.
But-
It's a legal process to protect yourself as you go out. I mean, we bid jobs, sometimes we get 24 hours, sometimes we get a month and a half, sometimes you get a year. It's all in how much time you are willing to invest in it to get on that list is whether you're interested in doing it. And if no one answered it, then at least you did the exercises.
Last year, with the expansion slots from last year, we did put it out to all preschools and education, early childhood centers, and as you were down to say, no one responded. And they knew that the following year, the state was going to be putting out some Smart Start money. And that was the criteria for the state money. Then, on top of it, the federal money came down. So the criteria remained the same, whether it was Smart Start or this federal funding. But we meet monthly, and they knew that money would be forthcoming, and this is what would be expected in order to receive some of this money. We've been asking for years, because we only had 2 early childhood care centers that qualify for school readiness funds. And so last year, we were fortunate that one more step forward. But again, we put it out there, and for whatever reason, for it's the NIAC accreditation, or whatever, criteria you have to reach.
But I think, and I know you guys are passionate about this, and I appreciate you're passionate, but I think a couple slots is very different in someone showing interest than a $756,000 tag for 42 new slots. Others might be interested. I'm just concerned from a liability standpoint of the board, if there is interest out there. And it's nothing at all against Torrington Child Care Center. I'm just concerned about the process.
Would the board like me to reach out to Shipman and see if the process passes the mustard test?
Couldn't hurt. I think it's worth finding out for sure, because I think Fiona's entirely right about there being a liability, a potential liability here with that much money at stake.
I didn't reach out over the last month because I wanted to see what your consensus was before I sent it to you.
No.
No? Bill?
I'm wondering, if we accept this grant, what process will be used to select the participants? Or have they already been selected?
It's already done.
No, we don't have the students.
Well,
No, you're talking about the students, you're talking about the vendors?
Students.
Oh, the students hasn't been done.
right, so it's income eligible, and the existing 3 centers would do their regular recruitment that they do right now, and have a waiting list if they needed a waiting list.
Do you think we should have legal, see if we should have done the bid process or not?
Yes.
Okay, Jess?
I agree.
Jim?
Yes, I agree.
No? Yeah. I'm guessing it's yes. You agree, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just send it, we'll just forward it over to them and have them, have Rich Mills just give it a sniff test.
When did we have to approve this?
You don't.
So this is a done deal if and when?
We either accept it or we don't accept the grant.
Well, she's saying we don't.
No, because it's technically Torrington Early Childhood Collaborative Grant, but because it's school readiness money, it has to go through the school district, and we already do that. We already, I'm trying to think how many.
But it's not a tech grant, it's a Torrington Public Schools grant. The money comes to the Torrington Public Schools, and the Torrington Public Schools spends the money. So the business end of the grant is ours.
But the money is already identified to where it would go.
But it was
We're already
identified
doing
by
it.
us.
Huh?
But it was identified by us where the new money goes.
It's going to the same early childhood centers that receive school readiness fund today. Right now, they've been receiving it for years. And so this just gives us more money to give them to do more programming.
I don't believe that you can legally increase someone's contract without bidding it, and that's the concern.
We could have a call with the Office of Early Childhood as well, because I did pose this back to them, and because of the timeliness in their turnaround, they understand the concern of the community. So they did write up a letter to say that only the school readiness sites were vetted for this, and there was no other center that could have been eligible for it. So, you know, I could arrange a phone call with the commissioner of the Office of Early Childhood as well, if that might help.
Maybe
But
put
it-
them together with Rich Mills.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be,
Sure.
you would have to get it in writing, only because anything over $10,000 has to be bid.
Right, right.
It's 10,000 still? And at 756,000, that wasn't, and no one else was given the opportunity to bid it. There has to be a clear-cut reason,
Sure.
a legal reason why. And unless someone else assumes that liability rests with the board.
Goes back to my question again, which is, if we don't take any action to accept it tonight, right? Then what's the time parameters in which this money still stays out there for us? I mean, is it indefinitely, so we don't get a legal opinion until March, May? Maybe it's tomorrow, but what if, just hypothetically, we don't, what's the time parameter in which we have to approve this?
Well, we do have.
The approval of the acceptance is
Sure.
what we're looking at.
Sure. They would like a memorandum of understanding on Friday. So we really, you know, we could ask for an extension for sure.
Okay, so we go back to our,
Real quick, if we did ask for the extension, how long is the extension? I didn't mean, sorry, Andrew.
no, that's a good question.
Probably, you know, only a couple weeks, because
Okay.
they then have to bring it back to the federal government in order to access the funds.
Okay.
So being that we don't meet again for another month as a full board, then that seems to be an obstacle to having received this money. It's the way we set up our business, having monthly meetings.
No, this has been kicking around, and this question's been being asked for 2 months. We just haven't gotten an answer yet. And it's, in the past, I would have called Shipman and gotten an answer back in September, but you, for one member, has taken
I'm not-
exception to me contacting the attorney and spending board money without your approval,
Right.
so I couldn't ask in December when the information was coming up until I get here tonight. So we can always have a special meeting. We can call one for Thursday, tomorrow, we can call one for next Monday. I mean, as soon as we get an answer.
Can you talk to Rich Mills right now?
What's that?
I mean,
After the meeting?
No, right now. I mean, you've done
I'm not
that.
gonna call him during the middle of the meeting, he's not gonna be able to process all that paperwork. He's gotta see the grant, he's gotta look at the statute. He's not gonna throw, you know, you're an attorney, you wouldn't throw an answer out that quickly with board liability on a $750,000.
Whatever.
Let me
Yes.
just ask a question. So if they were to accept the grant and the attorneys came back and said it had to go out to the bid, would the administration be willing to bid it at that point? I guess is the question, so that you don't lose the grant.
I don't believe that the state or the federal government will allow us to bid it. Because we submitted the original bid, we could only put in school readiness programs. That had to be part of the bid.
And did
We
they have to
listed them.
reside in Torrington?
Yes,
They had to take Torrington students. Did they have to, did the
Yes.
business have to be a Torrington business?
yes, I checked on that one, yes.
Yes.
Well, I had asked for a graph of all the people, and did we get that chart of all the questions and the different people of why they didn't qualify?
Yes, we did one.
The only 3 sites that qualify are the existing 3 sites, because they have to meet the school readiness requirements, and we can give you the general policy for school readiness, and that would, it's about that big, and it's what the 3 sites currently go through. So there are no other sites in Torrington that have met those levels. So they're really, when the Office of Early Childhood asked for the centers that would be interested in offering affordable, you know, high-quality education for more families in Torrington, these were the only 3 that were vetted and on the books as far as school readiness sites that meet all the requirements of a school readiness site. So there was no, in the other 14 communities, just so you know, there was no bidding process. There was no local RFPs. The timeline was, as I said, I know you can do an RFI very quick, and the requirements were very strict. So it was hard to, if we put it out there, no one would have come into those qualifications. So in order for Torrington to seize these, this wonderful offering, we had to act on it. And we were invited to do it, only one of 14 in the whole state of Connecticut, so that was something to be said as well.
Does the grant specifically say Torrington students and a Torrington business? Because that's really important, because there's already
Yes.
a site that is out of town but not far.
Yes.
That is stirring about this, so.
Okay, sure, no problem. Yes, absolutely. It does say Torrington
Torrington
students.
students, Torrington site.
Yes, and actually I have a letter from the State of Connecticut Office of Early Childhood that notes those 3 sites and the fact that the requirements for those sites have to be that they're up to school readiness standards, which again, I can get you the policies on those.
But there are other sites up to school readiness standards in not in Torrington.
No.
But that's what I'm saying, so it specifically says it has to be a
Oh, yes,
Torrington
yes,
business.
Torrington.
Because they're Torrington students that go to an out-of-town site that
Right.
meets the same criteria, the money couldn't go there?
The state only identified 14 communities, and it was based on a needs assessment that was done by the state as far as income, free and reduced lunches.
For students though, or business, because it's 2 very separate things, because we send Torrington students out for other services.
Yeah, I could give them the commissioner's contact information, and that town could contact them directly to get that specific.
It's not the town, it's a
not the
business.
town, It's the business.
The business.
See, these 3 are businesses, and these 3 businesses take children in for childcare.
Sure.
There are businesses that border the city of Torrington that receive Torrington
Okay.
children from Torrington families.
I understand, yes.
If they met the requirements,
They would have to be a school readiness site in order to.
but
Yeah, but what
Hilltop
if
wasn't,
they
but they
are?
could become one.
No, Hilltop is one.
They are now, but they weren't last year.
Yes, they were last year. They went through the work last year to become one.
But at the
And
beginning of the year,
received-
they
Yes, yes, they were, because they had school readiness slots last year.
I can get the actual document that says it has to be a Torrington business, if that would be more helpful. Because they really only designated 14 towns, so if they're not on that list, then they wouldn't have been eligible as a town themselves, the way that the grant was written.
So are there any surrounding towns immediately to Torrington that qualify?
Not that I know of. And I understand the student question. They're still Torrington. Those children, unfortunately, I know they're probably very happy where they are, would be eligible if they're 200% below the poverty level, be eligible to come to Torrington to these, expansion slots.
Andrew?
Could we do a conditional approval subject to board's attorney getting back? You said it's by Friday it has to be submitted?
Yes.
So let's say well, that's just the day for the, well, still, if he can't get it done, then the conditional approval doesn't get done. But if he, at the end of the day, tomorrow contacts you and says it's a go, then you don't have to reconvene the board. And then if he does, then we're right back in the same position of having to figure out where we can go from there. But at least if he does say it's okay tomorrow, then we don't have to reconvene and you're all set for Friday. How's that sound for a council?
Can we approve pending the RFI?
Well,
Without even bothering with the attorney? We feel like we need to do that anyways.
No, the problem is the grant is specifically written for those 3 institutions.
Right.
The concern is how those 3 institutions were identified and put on the grant without
Sure, no, I get
having the
that.
RFI. So if we were to introduce a new vendor at this point, I think the grant would be void. You would have to return the grant anyway.
Okay.
So it's a matter of, it's either we're in with these 3
Got it.
because legal is warm and fuzzy with it, or we're out.
Okay.
That's unfortunately the way the grant is.
Or what if the RFI went out and only these 3 applied then? Or qualified, I should say.
we're caught into a time parameter here.
Yeah.
I think my solution probably works.
We're going to have that as an action item very shortly.
Okay.
Someone's gonna have to make a motion, and you could make that motion.
Can I just ask one other question on this?
Sure.
Torrington Child Care Center, 42 new slots, site to be determined. Is it Torrington Board of Education that's responsible for finding the site, or is it Torrington Child Care Center?
It's the School Readiness Council, which is made up of many partners. And right now, the Torrington Child Care Center is looking at some sites in the community, hopefully, that will be able to house this program.
It would have to be in the community, I would think, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, if not, that goes back to that whole question.
Right. That's what I'm asking.
I guess I'm failing to clarify this. Before we could write this grant to the state, we had to make sure that we had school readiness, early childhood centers in Torrington. Because when a grant comes out from the state, they give certain criteria. Maybe it's a priority district, maybe you're an alliance district, maybe you have to be in collaboration with a university and college. When the state puts out a grant, they give you the perimeters of which you can apply for. Torrington could apply for this grant or the Smart Start money because we had school readiness early childhood centers in Torrington. So even before we could put anything on the paper, what we would like, how many slots we could use, all of that, we had to have the criteria, or we had to make the, it's like getting into college. You had to have school readiness programs. Torrington had and has 3 school readiness programs in Torrington. The ones listed that were listed in the grant. There were no others that met that criteria in town. Last year, when we knew this money was coming, not the federal money, but at least the Smart Start money, because we had expansion slots last year, we made it available for all early childhood centers in Torrington we would support them. We had funding for them to get their NIAC accreditation. We would do anything. I wish every early childhood center in Torrington could become a school readiness qualified center. But because they didn't take us up on the offer last year, one did, and one became very early on last year. So then when the state offered expanded slots, they took them. And then this year, we said, here it is again, but only these, when we spoke about it at our tech meeting, which we meet once a month, we said, this is the criteria for this. Do you want us to go for the state, i.e. federal grant, or do you want us to go for the Smart Start money? And tech voted to go for the federal grant through the state. That's what we did. It was not me reading about this grant and saying to Donna, hey, let's go for it and only include these 3 programs. There was a very strict process and protocol. It's like with this technology grant tonight. This is a competitive grant. We could go for this technology grant because last year we qualified because we're one of the 50 poorest cities in the state. We could go for this technology grant again. That's where we sit in a competitive range. And it's like with how much we can get reimbursed from the state for building. Because of our poverty level, we can get 72 reimbursement on a construction project. So, yes, we had to qualify to apply for this. Part of it is our socioeconomics, part of it is our demographics, part of it is that we already receive a significant amount of school readiness funding this year. And past years, I think we've been receiving school readiness money since the mid-60s as a school district. And all we do is funnel it. We don't help the centers become certified, to become NIAC accredited, to implement the curriculum. All we do is we get the money from the state, and then we give it out for how many slots they have. That is it. And then the city pays, they're the funnel for Torrington Child Care Center. They get the money from the state, and they write a check to Torrington Child Care, because the reason it's called Torrington Early Child Care Center is because it's the city of Torrington's early child care center, and has been since 1964. Ed Connection gets the money from the state and the federal government for Head Start, and so they funnel their operations. All we funnel is the school readiness slots.
So this money doesn't come through the Board of Ed?
Yes, it does. The grant is written to the Board of Education. The check comes to the Board of Education. The Board of Education writes the checks to the individual businesses. We own the liability. The problem is, and I
Well, the way
appreciate your
Cheryl
passion.
described it, you could say it's the city of Torrington.
No, that's a totally different grant. That's a grant that for different slots in that same school, but that money goes, and that's processed through Eleanor's office, actually.
Okay.
And what happens here, though, hang on, give me a second, is I appreciate your passion, I do. I love the fact that you guys are passionate on this, but from a purely business standpoint and a legal standpoint, the courts have a funny way of viewing, they don't care what the state's early childhood office writes on a piece of paper. There are certain legal guidelines that have to be followed, and part of it is a municipality cannot spend or authorize more than $10,000 without bidding it. The way this grant funnels the money through the board, we technically are picking who the money is going to, because we write the check. If we can prove legally that we are not liable, and that this process is perfectly legal and smooth, it's great. But right now, the liability sits with the 10 of us around this table.
But-
It doesn't sit with you, it doesn't sit with Donna, it sits with us, Ted.
Right,
that
but
if
we're
it's not
already
done-
doing that. We're already writing checks out every month for school readiness.
Yep.
To these three. So why, because now we have greater amounts, why does it, I guess that's
Use
what
the
I need to
computers.
understand.
When you guys do the computers, you get quotes for computers and you buy the computers. When we build a building, we're already spending money on buildings. Why do we rebid another building job? It's just adding more money to the buildings. If we took half of this building and we rebuilt it, and then a year later we want to do the other half, you can't just hand that contract to the same guy as a change order, because there's a limit as to how much you can increase. I believe it's 25% by state statute, that you can increase someone's contract before there has to be a rebid.
Sure.
Now, I don't know how much, but this $756,000 has to be more than 25% of the current contract with Torrington Child Care Center.
We can put it, if we put it out to bid, we could do that, but in the guidelines we have to follow, it has to go along with the state of Connecticut's application. And the main sentence would be they have to meet the school readiness site requirements, and we have a list. So we could, if you're saying due diligence, put it out there. In our knowledge, in our history, we know that there's only those three, but if it will help legally, there's definitely a process that we
Right.
could follow, if that's.
There
it's
could be
gonna
just
take.
one. I mean, there are projects out there, and I'm sure Eleanor through the city side has the same issues. There's only one guy in the state that does this. But that doesn't mean you can hand it to him. You have to bid it. There may be somebody from outside the state, there may be somebody that says, hey, I'll buy that machine and I'll go do it. And then when you get down to reviewing the bids, that person doesn't have the experience, they don't have this, they don't have that. For whatever reason, they can be disqualified, and you end up with the same guy anyway. But you still have to go through the process. And all I want to do is call Shipman and make sure whether we do or do not need to go through the process. If we don't, this is all just hot air. If we do, then we can cover ourselves.
Because we don't have the actual grant. Does the actual grant identify the sites, or does it identify school readiness sites? Or did you specifically name these people in there?
They're specifically named in the grant, and I think I had a copy of it. It's like 350 pages, but.
So you can't change, you're not gonna change. All we could potentially have is a situation where the lawyer says, we did not, board did not procedurally notice the public to bid on this. But we cannot change any of the terms of this grant. We have to accept it as is. If we go back to the grantor and say we made a mistake in our notification process, they're not going to let us at this point modify the 3 designated parties here.
I'm sure we could push back if we need to. I'm sure, like I said, this is a lead experience in the nation, and we're a part of it. So, they're learning as well as everyone else in the nation for this particular grant. And they did not, the state, when they do have a bidding process, they have protocol and say, you need to put out an RFP. They've done this in the past. This grant did not come with that prerequisite. This grant said designate your, the centers that are eligible in their minds to see what they want to do. If they want to expand some slots, if they want to, lengthen the day for the students. So the state did not have a process in place for us to follow suit, and none of the other 13 communities did such a thing. They might be having the same issues right now, and we can collaborate and see, maybe they have some guidance and they've come up with the solution. But honestly, the grant was turned around in about 6 weeks. And it was a feather in Connecticut's cap because Connecticut has consistently tried to access money from the federal government for early childhood. 3 times in a row, raced to the top, and they did not receive it. This was the first time, and the creation of the Office of Early Childhood, I'm sure, had a lot to do with it, that the state of Connecticut was recognized nationally for this sort of work. So they turned it around quick, and they themselves, the Q&As are going back and forth. We get them every week now because we have more questions, they have more answers, so there is still room to, push back and say, this is something that we're struggling with, and I'd be happy to facilitate that.
When applying for this grant was being considered by the group that was considering applying, was there any discussion or input from the board on this grant application?
Superintendent participated in providing information, needs, our population, the demographics, the free and reduced lunch.
But there was no one from the Board of Education?
They never-
Right, well, we'll ask the question. This motion will come up when we get to action items. Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.
Can I ask just one question before you go
Sure.
away?
Sure.
Just for clarification, I think you said when we were talking about eligibility, these are kids who are 200% below poverty. Didn't you mean they're below 200% of the poverty level?
Correct.
Okay, there are differences between what you said and what's
No.
true, right? They're not at 1/4 of poverty, they are at least twice, or can be. Okay.
Like for a family of 4,
Yeah, no,
47.
I understand that, I just heard it said differently.
I'm glad you asked. I heard it that way.
Well, the question is,
That's
this
true.
is a welfare program that applies to whom? Very, very poor, or people who are already far above the poverty level?
I have a question before we move on. My understanding is that this grant is not indefinite, right? It's for a limited number of years, 4 years, and it has to be reapproved after each year. Correct. Based on what I read, that's accurate. What's the long-term plan for these spots that will be created by this grant if the grant does not renew?
There's more state money hopefully coming down the pike. The governor is very in support of universal free pay, and the Smart Start grant that has been offered this year, which we did not go for because we received the federal grant, is something that is 10 years out in their making, in their plan. So there might be other early childhood money to access to support the sustainability past the 4 years.
But we don't know that.
There's no definitive.
No.
It's all
Nothing's
based on
done.
what grant money's available.
So theoretically, all these funds could be created and then they could go away. Is that accurate?
That's it.
Did you get a piece of the baby kids? Better off.
Okay, Governor Malone, oh, this is yours.
That was just from the visit. That was nothing to,
Okay. 2015 sneak peek agenda from Kate.
yep, that's in your package too.
Okay.
No, that was mailed to all the board members.
Oh, okay. Okay, and the next piece is just our relationship with Education Connection. So that you could see how we're involved with our regional education center. That was just FYI for the board.
Michael, do you have the revised ones?